Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name's Karen from Australian Environmental Education, and this week, if you didn't know already, is Sea Week. Sea Week is a national celebration looking at oceans and the marine environments. It's usually run around the second week of March each year. So I'm very excited to join you today to talk about some of my adventures, my journey beneath the waves, and what I like to look at during Sea Week. So the theme for Sea Week this year is our search. Looking at what you might discover. So I will talk a little bit about some of the things that you may see washed up on the shore that gives you clues to what's living in our marine environments. Now we are using webinar format today, so you should be able to see me, but I won't be able to see and hear you. I've got the chat disabled at the moment, so please put your questions in the Q&A and I will get to them as we go through the program. There'll be some points that I might stop and have a look at the Q&A, otherwise I'll wait to the end as well. I'll be sharing some of the things I've got in the room with me, some of the props, and also some images that we'll go through. Excellent. So as I mentioned, I have been scuba diving for almost 30 years. So a lot of what we'll talk about today is my journey beneath the waves, my experience of scuba diving, but I will also talk a little bit about the variety of marine environments, because most of the places I've been to are around the Pacific Ocean, and especially around where I live in Sydney. So for those of you that are not in New South Wales, anywhere in Australia, and also not near the coast, there are lots of places throughout Australia that are quite a long distance from the coast. I think they've worked out that there's pretty much 1,000 kilometres from anywhere in Australia to the coast, but that is still a long distance to travel. So we'll be focusing mainly on my experiences in my favourite areas around Sydney. Excellent. So I'll get started and we'll have an explore beneath the waves. So I'm just going to share my screen. And this is me snorkeling, so not actually scuba diving at this point here. You might notice that I'm wearing glasses at the moment. So that special mask, my snorkeling or scuba diving mask, actually has prescription lenses in it. So if you do wear glasses and you think, oh, I can't really go snorkeling or I can't go scuba diving, you absolutely can get prescription masks. So the one I've got actually is linked quite closely to my prescription, but there are other sort of generic ones that you can get, a little bit like when you can buy glasses at the service station that are not exactly your prescription, but close. So a lot of places, especially in holiday destinations, will have prescription masks available. You might notice as well, I'm wearing gloves in this photo. So I wear gloves even if I'm snorkeling, because I like to learn from touching and exploring. So I don't want to hurt myself by touching something that stings or is sharp, but I also don't want to do damage to the environments by touching them and breaking them or anything rubbing off my skin. I also, when I snorkel, wear a full body rash vest, so called a lycra, and that's for a couple of reasons. The sunscreen that I would need so I don't get burnt can actually wash off into the water and can cause, can affect coral and different marine environments. So if there was lots and lots of people with lots and lots of sunscreen, it can actually make the water quite murky. And I have seen that in some holiday destinations before. So I also wear a lycra. It protects the environment that I'm exploring from me, but also protects me from brushing up to any things that could sting or scratch me as well. Now we're about to look at diving buddies. So one of the things that's really important when you're scuba diving is having something called a dive buddy. Now a dive buddy is essentially someone that looks after you when you're underwater. So I'm really lucky that pretty much for the last 25 years or so, my dive buddy is my sister. So we have been diving together for a very, very long time. So we look after each other, we keep each other safe, we make sure our equipment is working, so making sure our air tanks and those kinds of things are turned on, so we have all the things we need. And I'll go through some of the equipment. Now you might notice we're wearing hoods on our wetsuits because this was a colder dive. So in Sydney, it doesn't get super cold. We don't need a dry suit or anything like that. We can still what's called a wetsuit, but we do have our hoods because you lose a lot of heat from your head. So the hoods can help us stay warmer underwater. You'll notice that I'm wearing a few things. It looks like I'm wearing a backpack. We'll have a look at that in a moment. So here we are getting our equipment together. So that what looked like a backpack is what's called a BCD, and it's called a buoyancy control device, and it helps us go up or down in the water depending on how much air we put into it. So similar to a life vest, but when a life vest has air in it, or it's floating, it floats the whole time. We can adjust ours with these hoses that come out of the tank, and the tank is not full of oxygen. It's actually full of compressed air, and that is what we breathe underwater. So it attaches to our BCD, and there's a plug in it that we can put air in to go up in the water and take air out to go down in the water. But humans in these circumstances with a wetsuit and all these things, we like to float. So we actually have, you can see it on me here, this pink belt. This particular one here, it's called a weight belt. And I have weights on that to help me be heavier and sink through the water. We've also got our fins that will help us move through the water nice and easily. Because we're walking along the wharf there, we don't have them yet. Now, I want to teach you a couple of signs that are information that we use when we're underwater, because I do like to talk a lot, but when we're underwater, I have got a regulator in my mouth that I'm breathing through. I can't talk. So we need to use signals to communicate. Now, you can actually do, you know, those little whiteboards that you can get. We call them slates underwater. You can actually get little ones of those to write messages, but we tend to use some hand signals. So let's learn those now. So that's my sister and I in the water. We're just about to go down through the water. So the first thing we do once we're in the water is we do the OK symbol. So everyone do the OK symbol with me. And that's to make sure that we're feeling comfortable, because sometimes things might not fit quite right and you're just not feeling great. So you spend a couple of moments on the surface to readjust, maybe clean your mask, make sure there's no air in it till everyone's comfortable. And then we use the down symbol. So this isn't a bad thing for scuba divers. This is pretty exciting. So it means we're going to go down into the water underneath the waves, and then we do OK. So let's take this journey beneath the waves, guys. So everyone, let's do the down symbol, do OK, and then it's time to look at what's underneath the water. And our oceans make up such a large part of the Earth's surface. About 71% of the Earth's surface is made up of different marine environments, and it contains the greatest diversity or variety of life. Both plants and animals are found in these marine environments. We've got places like the picture here, looking at seagrass, kelp forests, and this one here that I'll focus on a little bit later, which are called sponge gardens. The marine environment is classified from all the way from the high tide mark, and if you're on the coast at the moment, the high tide mark is pretty high, all the way to the deepest ocean trenches and the deepest ocean floor. And the deepest place is the Mariana Trench at about 11,000 meters deep. And it's very cold, very dark, and there's a lot of pressure of all of that water above. So we get some very strange animals living down in the deep sea. But the majority of animals living in the ocean are in the top 200 meters, called the sunlight zone. And that's where the sunlight can still reach. These are some of the habitats that you might be familiar with. Our coral reefs. About 25% of marine life are found in the coral reef environments that are found in the warm tropical waters. So you'd be quite familiar with these marine environments. They're beautiful places to snorkel and to scuba dive because the water is quite warm and there's such a big variety of things to see. Lots of bright colours of the coral formations and such a big variety of fish life and other marine life as well. This doesn't look quite as exciting, but it is such an important environment. These are called our mangrove forests, and they're found in sort of our wetlands. So sometimes that the tide is out and a lot of the tree areas are on the surface, and then the tide goes in. So sometimes called intertidal areas, sometimes called wetlands or estuaries. But these areas, our mangrove forests, are really important because they provide safe places for a lot of our marine life, and they're often called the nurseries of the sea. So lots of baby fish and crustaceans and other baby marine life will actually come from the open ocean into these shallow, warmer waters or protected waters where mangroves are to grow up. So imagine it's like marine life preschool. So very important habitats. This is one of those deep sea areas. This is near a deep sea vent. And even though it is generally dark, a lot of pressure, and most of the deep sea environments, it's very cold. These deep sea vents are really warm because there's warm gases coming out from inside the earth, and it warms the water around it. And they have some amazing animals that they've been discovering. They now have lots of underwater submarines and submersibles that they can remote control to go down and look at these environments. So there's lots of animals that they're finding down here all the time. But this is the environment I want to talk about most. This is a sponge garden. Now, around Sydney, where I live and where I do most of my scuba diving, there are these amazing places called sponge gardens. I like to always think about it a little bit like the octopus's garden, and a very similar environment to where we would find many octopus as well. So these are real sponges, so natural sponges, and the colors are also real as well. When sponges wash up on the shore, they lose their color when they dry out. So we've got these bright oranges and yellows, and at the front here, we've got these things called sea tulips, and they will actually move. So imagine, similar to like when you see leaves blowing in the wind, we will actually see the sponges, not all of them, some of them are really hard, but some of them are soft sponges will sway, and the sea tulips will sway in the ocean current. So there's quite a lot of movement as well. And near these sponge garden environments, we also get these kelp beds. So this is brown kelp, very common around the rocky reefs of Sydney. So if you think about the coastline of much of Australia, we have rocky areas, and then we have our sandy beaches. Then rocky areas and our sandy beaches, and they are sort of repeated all the way along the coast. So on the rocky areas, we can get the, especially when the current's really strong, we get these kelp forests, and we'll also get some of these sponge gardens found as well. And these are what we call in temperate waters. So that's a really big word that just means it's not warm tropical waters, but it's not really cold waters either. It's the middle water. So just right, if we're thinking of the Goldilocks zone. So just right in terms of not too hot, not too cold. We get these temperate waters, and there is still a really huge variety of life found in those temperate waters. So even though it's not quite as busy as the tropical areas, it's still an amazing place to explore. Now, please put your questions in the chat as I'm going, in the Q&A, I should say, as I'm going. I'm going to start now focusing on some of my favorite animals to see. You may recognize some of these, you might have a question about some of them. But when I'm first underwater, now remember we're okay, we're going down. When we get underwater, we do the okay symbol again, because we're looking for some of the different animals. So the first thing I would see is this animal here. Now, usually, if I ever feel something really big, really close to me, it will often be a blue groper. They can get huge, sort of 80 centimeters in size. They are really, really this color. They are very, very bright blue, and they are what we call territorial. So they have little zones that they look after. And when I swim out of that area, he'll leave me alone. But when I come back into it, he'll come and have a look for me again. Now, I know this is a male because he's blue. They are fascinating animals. If you're in New South Wales, this is our state fish. the blue groper. They are protected as well because they are friendly, and so lots of people used to catch them all the time. Now, the really fascinating thing about this fish here, when the largest adult male dies, the biggest female, and they're usually a browny greener color, about half the size of the males, will actually go through a sort of a chemical hormonal change and will turn into a male and will turn blue. So there's always going to be one big adult male looking after, its family. And when it dies, the largest female will turn into the male. So it's a really fascinating change. And they are very interesting. Have I ever dived in a submarine? No, I haven't. That's a great question. And I haven't actually ever dived in a submersible. I would love to. And if I ever get a chance to go onto a research vessel or boat, I may be able to do that one day. The biggest difference would be I'd be dry, and the pressure changes would be different. So when I'm scuba diving, I have to deal with all the pressure just on my own. So I'll just stop sharing for a moment. So just imagine when you're standing at the surface of the earth, you have one atmosphere of pressure because there's only one amount of air above you. For every 10 meters you go underwater, it's one more atmosphere of pressure. So that pressure, imagine when you're down to 11,000 meters, the amount of pressure. So as scuba divers, we can only go so deep. So the deepest I've ever scuba dived is about 40 to 50 meters, which is quite a lot. And that's down through the water. The train, like the Navy SEALs and the really people that do lots of scuba diving for their job, they can go down, I think it's about to sort of 60 to 100 meters. The deepest any humans ever been, I think, is about 350. And it's one of those people doing free diving. And it's, very, very, very hard. But the deeper you go, the colder it is, the darker it gets, and the more pressure. So by the time I get 50 meters down, I've got 6 atmospheres of pressure on my body. So it actually changes the way my body works. So that's why when we go back to the surface, we actually need to go quite slowly. If we go very quickly, we get bubbles, air bubbles in our blood that can be very dangerous. So we need to make sure we follow the rules and go very slowly because of that. Excellent. Keep popping your questions into the Q&A there. So I'm just going to go back to my next friend that I like to see when I'm scuba diving. So we've had our blue groper here, and he's generally the first thing that you'll see. If I'm very lucky and I look very carefully, I will find one of these. This is called a moray eel, and they really blend into the environment. So here, the rest of the body of this animal is actually tucked into the rocks, and they will absolutely be like this. You'll see them with their mouth open, those amazing teeth, waiting. So they're waiting for things to eat, essentially. So I really, great reason that I wear gloves and really have to be careful about where I put my hands so I don't get nicked. I've been lucky to see a couple of moray eels actually swimming, free swimming from one place to the other. And even though sometimes their heads look really small, sometimes they can get meters in length. The largest one I've ever seen was 2 meters long. So just imagine it, guys, making sure you don't bump into everyone. Put your arms out, fingertip to fingertip. Just have a little look. That means I've seen a moray eel swimming through the water longer than that fingertip to fingertip. So that's absolutely a pretty impressive, huge animal there as well. Great question from Zara there. I was wondering, can you yawn when you were diving? You can sneeze, you can cough, you can do all sorts of things. It's not always comfortable. So I don't know if I've ever yawned underwater because there's so much going on. I probably haven't even thought about it. But the worst thing for me is if I laugh underwater, and I do sometimes, something funny will happen, or I'll do something silly and try to point something to my sister, and then I'll laugh and my face changes shape. I get lots of crinkle marks here when I laugh. And what happens is I get water flood into my mask if I laugh too much. So I do actually have to be careful not to laugh. And I think if I yawned, I would have the same thing. My mask, the seals of my mask would break a little bit, and I would get water up into there. So you do have to be a little bit careful to try to keep your face shape. You can get the water out of your mask again. It's a bit disgusting. I'll go on to big screen and I'll show you how you do it. So if I had my mask on, I push it like that, and then I blow air out of my nose as much as I can, and it blows all of the water out the bottom of my mask. But it does mean sometimes your mask fills up with snot. So it's better than having water in your mask, but that's one of the ways to deal with that. So you can yawn, but it might just fill your mask up with water sometimes. Okay. How has the environment changed underwater over the years that you have been diving? And that's from Fadden Primary School. That's a great question. And in some cases, it's got better. And that's great news. So since I started diving, they've actually made a lot of marine parks. So the marine parks mean that you can't fish in certain areas, or you can fish, but you can't take too many of any particular environment. But some of them you can't fish or collect at all. So a little bit like a national park under the water. And that's great news. And that means that some areas really have looked a lot better. But whilst I've been diving, I've seen fishing rods, nets, plastics, a shopping trolley, a beach chair, all sorts of strange things underwater over the years. So we do try to remove what we can, especially any tangled lines. Just 2 weeks ago, I was scuba diving with my sister, and she got a fish hook caught in her BC. So luckily not her wetsuit, but her BC, and that we were trying to get out because we didn't want her to get tangled underwater too much. So yeah, there are certainly times when you see things that are rubbish, but in general, a lot of places have improved. Now, at the moment, with all of the rain that we've just had, we won't be scuba diving for, a good couple of maybe week at least after the sediment settles. So what it would look like at the moment would be very what we call low visibility, which that means you can't see very far. So it's like murky water because all of the sediment, fertilizers, rubbish that is all coming from land is washing into the ocean. The waves are really big at the moment, so it's really stirred up and we need to let it settle out. Now, it may be that next time we go diving, we see lots of big bits of rubbish. I've been diving after storms and there was like a tree branch with like gum leaves on it, quite, about 10 meters down, quite far away from the mouth of the freshwater environment. So that can have quite a big impact. But in general, a lot of the places, when they've protected certain species, I mentioned that the blue groper is protected, so their numbers have improved. An animal I'll show you in a moment is called the grey nurse shark, and their numbers have improved. So not only their what we call abundance, so the number of individuals, but also their range or their distribution. So where they're found is improving as well. So that's a great question from Fadden Primary School. Why did you start scuba diving and how many times have you done it? So I actually started scuba diving at high school. So I was really lucky. I didn't actually do the subject, so I'm not quite sure how I talked my way onto the scuba diving course, but it was a marine studies course. I was doing biology and I couldn't fit in the marine studies course as well. But I must have been really keen and enthusiastic because they let me go on the scuba diving training trip. So it was actually through high school. So really, really lucky. I was 17. When I first learnt at a place called Jervis Bay on the south coast of New South Wales. And it was great. I've always loved the marine environment, and yeah, I jumped at the chance of doing it. So you can do some basic introductions from 12. So yeah, it is absolutely, if you're confident, practice snorkeling maybe to get confident under the water, but it is a great thing to do. I've got a question here is, can the eel bite you, the moray eel? Absolutely. They would be able to bite me and go through those gloves, those wetsuit gloves that I had on. I have never been bitten by a moray eel. I'm very careful and respectful of all of the animals underwater and try not to poke anything. So yes, we do have to be careful. Do your ears pop underwater from Julie there? Absolutely. And so a lot of the time, one of the ways that we do try to pop our ears is by moving your jaw. So mentioning yawning before, when you're not underwater, yawning and moving your jaw from side to side is a great way to try to pop your ears. When we're underwater, because we've got that mouthpiece, the regulator we're breathing with, we tend to do this one, holding your nose and blowing until you pop your ears. And it's really, really important. So it's a great thing that you've brought up, that you need to make sure you pop your ears as you go down. If you don't, the pressure can actually burst your eardrums. So if I've had a cold, this has happened once or twice with my sister and I over the years, that we've had hay fever or a cold, and we haven't been able to pop our ears. So sometimes we cancel. We don't go if we can't pop our ears. Sometimes though, as we go down really slowly, when we can go up and down a little bit, and it can help us pop those ears. But you do have to be super careful. And it's just about knowing whether you're feeling well. So there's a few things. If you can't pop your ears, you can give it a try, but you wouldn't go down very quickly, and you wouldn't force it. So if they're not popping, you go back to the boat or you go back to shore. Excellent question. We've got another one here. Have you ever seen a shark? Yes, I have. It's one of my favorite animals to see. And I've got a few different pictures of sharks I'll show you in a moment. What is the most dangerous animal I have ever seen? Oh, I'll think about that one, Chloe. It is a tricky one. So there's some things that could be considered dangerous or deadly. It depends on where it is. So underwater, I'll have to have a little think. I don't think I've seen anything that's particularly dangerous. Have you ever seen any marine eggs while scuba diving? Yes, I have, and I've got some ones to show you here in a moment. Has anything dangerous happened to you when you're being scuba diving? So in terms of dangerous things, a couple of times. So mostly it's me panicking. So one example is up in Queensland on the Great Barrier Reef, we did something called a drift dive. And a drift dive is you jump in, you let the current take you, and then you get picked up at the other end. And this was a nighttime drift dive. There was a lot going on there. And a lot of the coral in the Great Barrier Reef are round. So there's a round things that we call bommies, and they're just round bits of coral, but they're quite big. So this one was about 10 meters across. And as we're drifting towards it, everyone was going one direction around it, but the current was trying to take me the other way. I didn't want to go the other way because everyone else had gone left. I didn't realize that it just joined up on the other side of the bommy, but I was worried I was going to get lost. So I was finning and kicking as hard as I can to go with the way that the group was going. Now, eventually I did go the way the group was going, but I got a little bit panicked. And what it meant was that I was going, I was using a lot of my air tank. So instead of having my air tank that would last a certain amount of time, I was going through it a little bit quickly. But once I calmed down and was with the rest of the group, I was able to slow my breathing down and finish the rest of the dive, no problems. But that kind of thing, panicking, is probably one of the most dangerous things that can happen. So it is really important to always think, slow your breathing down, and be calm. And because at the same time, I had lots of people going the same direction I was going. So half the group ended up going left and half the group ended up going right. But for some reason, I got it stuck in my head that I had to go right. And if I just relaxed and gone left, we would have been fine. But it's all about trying to stay calm as well. What's your favorite and least favorite place to dive? I'll talk about that in a moment. Oh, for someone that's not sure about what your ears are popping. So if you go up a very big hill or down a very big hill, sometimes the pressure will make your ears pop. It can happen sometimes if you're ever on a plane as well. And it's something that happens when you go underwater, you need to pop your ears. So that's what it means. So as the pressure changes, as you're going down the water, you need to pop those ears. Okay. From Donna, so Freya, actually, have I ever been tempted to touch something dangerous? Yes, all the time. It's one of my things. I'm a poker, so I do like to touch things. But when, I look at it from the perspective of this is a live animal, and they don't want to be touched. So I'm being respectful by not touching them. So that's how I look at those ones. Have I ever seen a whale? Yes, but not while scuba diving. I was very lucky last year to be diving with some seals, but both whales and dolphins I've only seen up on the surface. Okay, guys, I'm going to get back to some of these pictures to show you, which will cover some of my favorite animals, and then look at some of the props, and we'll carry on for some more questions afterwards. Okay. Where were we? We're at the moray eel that, yes, definitely can bite, but you've always got to be careful. So this is something that is a very dangerous animal. This one here is called a stonefish. Fabulous camouflage. Blend in to the bottom of the rocks. Now, a lot of the rocks at the bottom of the sort of the rocky reef areas do get quite pink. They get algae encrusted. So these guys camouflage really well. Along their back or their dorsal, there are spines. Most of the time it's people either putting their hands on them or walking in shallow areas and treading on them. So they're considered to be the most venomous fish in the world. So I have seen these, and it's just a matter of looking and not touching. Here we go. I did this one as a collection. These are what we call nudibranchs or sea slugs. I think nudibranchs are much nicer because they absolutely are beautiful, these different sea slugs. Some of them are only the size of your thumbnail, if you have a look, or even the size of your pinky nail. But some of them, this long purple one here, could get to the size of your hand. Absolutely beautiful. If you do live near the coast and you've maybe had blue bottles washed ashore, you may have seen the one down the bottom here called the blue dragon. And they actually eat blue bottles. So often when there's a big blue bottle raft washed ashore, you can often see these big blue sea slugs there as well. But sometimes you've got to look really careful for a lot of these underwater. Now, one of my favorite animals is the octopus. I think my favorite marine group are the cephalopods, which is a group of mollusks which make up squids, cuttlefish, and octopus. And I am fascinated by them. I'm going to share a video later on this afternoon when we finish of what I'm calling my sister, the octopus whisperer. So it's not a dive that had a great visibility, but she found 5 octopus in one dive. Now, this is not her photo, but we saw one like this that was on the sand using shells to help it camouflage. So the octopus can actually do that themselves. They're amazing camouflage. They can change their color in the 1/3 of a second to blend in both texture and color. But they do like to have a bit of protection. So they will use things like shells like this to actually give them some extra protection. And I saw one only a couple of weeks ago doing that in Sydney Harbour. These are definitely my favorite animals. So these are those cuttlefish. I love seeing them diving. They're really friendly. They want to come up and say hello and interact. And again, they've got that amazing color change as well. So they can change color within a 1/3 of a second. They can change their texture. They're putting their tentacles up the front to say, hey, what's going on? This one here is looking a lot calmer. And if you look really closely, you might be able to see a little rainbow on the side there. So on those dots there, they're called chromatophores, and that is how they change color. They're little sensors, and they can change the color, the pigment under the skin of the cephalopod, and it kind of picks up the colors around it. So they do 2 things. They will either blend into the background and try to look dull and disappear into the rocks. And at the same time, they're probably slowly swimming backwards back under a rock ledge. And they use this little frill at the side to move and float, to move back and forth. If they want to go somewhere in a hurry, they've got what's called a siphon. They can force water out and go really fast in the opposite direction. They can also change the texture of their body to look cranky as well. I've seen them flash in color. They can change so quickly, they can pulse. Absolutely incredible. They range from little guys like this little dumpling squid or cuttlefish to the giant cuttlefish found down in South Australia that can get, you know, up to a metre or so. Most of the ones I scuba dive with are about maybe 50 centimetres or so to maybe 80, but they're really impressive and great to see and very friendly. A little bit of cephalopod trivia. The largest eyeball of any animal anywhere in the world is the giant squid. It's about the size of a soccer ball or a basketball. So next time you're shooting a hoop or kicking a goal, just think it's about the size of the eyeball of a giant squid. And you can see those really great chromatophores here as well under the skin there. So all of those dots. Giant clams, they are one of the longest living marine animals. They can live up to almost 200 years. And I've been in the Pacific Ocean and seen baby giant clams. It seems weird, but some of them have only been 5 centimeters in size, and they might only be a couple of years old, but it will take a lifetime, or many of our lifetimes, to reach full size, and they can get to be 1.5 meters or so. So you can probably pop your fingers out again, looking at fingertip to fingertip. And for some of you, it's getting to almost that size, that 1.5 meters in size for some of these. Now, a few people mentioned sharks. This is a grey nurse shark. So this is one of the ones I like to see, and I often will see around Sydney. They are now protected, so their numbers are improving really well. They are huge. They can get to well over 2 meters. So you definitely feel that you're in the presence of something very big underwater. They are amazing. They'll just sort of swim back and forth. They were almost hunted to extinction because they had lots of teeth. Now, if you learn about different teeth and what teeth do, and different teeth, whether it's herbivores, carnivores, and so forth, the teeth of the grey nurse shark are lots of points. So I know that that means they're a fish eater. So what they're doing is waiting for a fish to go past and all those points to grab and get the fish trapped inside, that it can eat it. Another one we see is called a wobbegong. Now, these are also a really big sized shark. They're often called carpet sharks. You can see blending in and camouflaging to the bottom of the rocky reef, a few sponges around there as well. Very common around Sydney, and often ones that I would see as well. This here is the stingray. So this is a giant common stingray, and this this is huge, these animals. So I've had a couple of fun experiences with these guys. I'm just looking for my final shark, and he's hiding. I don't think I've got him. So sorry, guys. I'm just going to unshare for a moment and show you what I've got on the table. So this one's my baby sharky. This is a baby Port Jackson shark. And these are a very common shark that I'll see when I'm scuba diving. They're not a big shark, and they don't really have teeth the same way as we would expect sharks to have. They've got sort of a plate at the front that they crush crabs and little other crustaceans. This one's probably only 2 months old, so it's quite small. I don't think I've ever seen a Port Jackson shark that's bigger than me. So they're kind of less than 1.5 meters. But what they do, which we see a lot for someone that asked if I've seen any eggs, they lay eggs. So if you haven't ever seen one before, this is a shark egg. Now, most of the time you don't see this bit tangled on them still. And this is really important, because what the sharks will do is actually tangle that into the kelp to stop the eggs drifting away. So it protects them and keeps them safe. The mother sharks would also sometimes get these and push them and twist them into the rocks. And so it's like a little corkscrew. It gets stuck in the rocks. So it's quite amazing of those kinds of things that the animals are actually doing. And I'll just show you this over here as well. So if you have been doing any what we call beach combing, if you do have access to the beach, these are some of the things that you might see. That was one of the blue sea slugs I mentioned. You might see cuttle bones from the cuttlefish, my favorite, washed up on the shore. Next time you do see a cuttle bone, have a close look. This one here actually has, I'm going to zoom in. Oh, let's fix my light. You can see some little teeth marks. So it gives us a clue of what might have eaten the cuttlefish or might be munching on the cuttle bones while it's been floating around. And if I have a look, another one here is really common. Oopsie, that was the wrong way. Of this type, I'm going to zoom in again. These ones here, if you've ever seen them, they are little clear eggs of a shell like this. This is called a cartwright shell, named after the ruts and the roughness, and that's its eggs, and you find them washed up on the beach all of the time. This little one here is not actually a shell. It's called an operculum. It's a door. You can see one here. So often you'll find those little circles with a little spiral, and they're from this, or different types of shells, but often they're from this one here called a turban shell. And if I see if I can hold it up right, it sits inside like that as a door. So when it's getting too hot or they're drying out, they close the door, and they're usually sitting like that so you can't see it. And then when they open the door, there we go, it will sit out there, and the whole body, the sea snail, will actually then move around. So there's some really cool things that you might find washed up on the shore that you don't necessarily know what they're from. So sometimes you'll find things like this. I'm going to hold it nice and close. So this is a cuttle bone. Let's see if it'll focus there for you. Can you see the little things on the edge? They're goose-necked barnacles. So as this was floating around, another type of animal has attached to it. So that is one of the really common things that you'll find, is not just one thing when you're exploring and looking and beach combing. So that's something to keep an eye out for. You might find something like a shark egg washed up on the shore. Now you know, spiral, that's your shark egg. You could find a cuttle bone washed up on the shore. You could even find something like this. This is a weedy sea dragon that has dried. It's got washed up on the shore, and the hard outer, similar to a seahorse, has meant that it keeps its shape. So it's kind of like almost like an exoskeleton, but it is internal of the body. But all of these things will fade over time after they've washed up on the shore. Now, guys, I know that there's lots more questions. I'm just jumping back to them. For those of you that do need to head off exactly at 2:45, thank you so much for joining me. For those of you that are keen to stay, I will finish up with some of your questions. Oh, there we go. Oh, I think I've got to the end of the questions. Well done, everyone. So I will show you, if you haven't seen one yet, the Weedy Sea Dragon and the Leafy Sea Dragon. So I just showed you a dried one. I will just show you what they look like underwater. And it is a common thing for us to be able to see. So that was our huge stingray. This is the Leafy Sea Dragon. So unlike seahorses that swim this way, the Weedy Sea Dragons and Leafy Sea Dragons will swim horizontal. And they're big. Imagine your 30-centimetre ruler. They're about that size. So these ones are found in the cooler waters. And this is the kind of ones that I would see called the Weedy Sea Dragons. It's what we see most often around Sydney. Absolutely beautiful. You can see those dots. You can see the pattern that was there on the one I had, even though it was dry. And if you look closely, those little circles there are actually eggs. And so I know that this is a male because the male's got the egg. So the same way with the seahorses, that seahorses have a pouch, and the females give the males the eggs to look after. The females will actually lay the eggs on the tail of the Weedy Sea Dragon. And when they hatch out, everyone, they're about the size of your thumbnail. So they are super tiny and super amazing. Thinking of the big difference between animals as well. This is one of the largest things I've seen. These are called sunfish. They are super weird. They don't have the kind of tail that you expect a fish to have. And their longest part is the tip of their dorsal fins down. So that's how they get so big. Some of them up to sort of 3 meters in size. But yet, when they're juveniles, we often call them fish larvae, this is the size of them. So what a difference between something the size of your pinky nail to something several meters in size. So it just gives you an idea of big variety of marine organisms and where they might live. So those little guys are ending up in those nurseries to grow, but they spend their adult part of their life in open ocean. Okay, a couple more questions. Have I ever seen a black tip shark? Yes, so I've seen a black tip and a white tip reef shark in some of those coral environments. They're not a particularly huge shark, so I haven't had to be worried or concerned about scuba diving with them. They're looking for much smaller fish than me, but they are very quick and they're very hard to spot because they move so quickly. Oh, you've got some favorite marine animals. I do love stingrays as well. So my experience with that big giant stingray was a little bit of a cartoon experience. So if you think about cartoons, when someone gets surprised, they always draw it like the eyes are going, whoa. I felt like I had that with a stingray. We were in really shallow water up at the Central Coast in New South Wales, and I was swimming back in over just a little rock. So I was probably only in maybe 2 meters of water. So as I came up over this little rock, so did the stingray. And we were about this far from each other. And I swear his eyes went, oh, my eyes went, and luckily we made some good choices. He went one way and I went the other way, and we were able to go around each other. But I have to say, my heart was beating really fast. It was just a bit of a shock. We've got someone here asking, have I seen a great white shark? So from Antonio. No, I haven't, and I'm really grateful. There's about 3 species of sharks I don't want to see when I'm underwater: a great white shark, a bull shark, and a tiger shark. One reason, they're very big. 2, they are known to, test things with their teeth. Sharks don't have hands. They can't really, poke you and say, what are you? They're going to use their teeth just to test. And they don't have teeth like the grey nurse, those pointy ones. They have really great, well-adapted and evolved slashing teeth. So even a little sort of bite can do a lot of damage. So I wouldn't go scuba diving if I knew they were there. And I would be very careful in those circumstances. So I wouldn't even do cage diving where they do tourist dives and you can go in a cage and they attract the sharks on purpose. I actually think that's quite dangerous, and you don't want sharks to always think to come visit boats. So I haven't seen one, and I hope I don't see one when I'm in the water with it. But thanks for asking. Most sharks, no problems. Have I ever seen an animal stuck in a net? So I haven't seen an animal in a net. Some of the places around Sydney Harbour where we go scuba diving are around the beach pools, and they do have nets around the pools. You think they're not actually sealed. It's multi-layers of net, so anything big, it's too big to make its way through. So I can start my scuba dive on outside the nets and then come inside the nets. But the nets, these smaller ones, have seahorses, lots of sponges and other animals living and growing on them. The nets get really a problem when they're catching big things. So a bigger animal could get stuck in those. Luckily, these ones aren't the big ones they use on the beach. I have seen some animals with hooks stuck in them or bits of line, but I haven't seen anything big trapped in a net. And it's hard because when an animal is feeling trapped or scared, it would be very difficult for us to then get them out of the net if if they're a dangerous animal. So that is a tricky one as well. Have I ever seen a shipwreck? Yes, I have. I've been on a couple of, so I've been on 2 shipwrecks, but I guess they would be an on-purpose shipwreck. So what that means is that they were what's called scuttled. So they were blown up on purpose. So one of them is the HMAS Adelaide, which was sunk off the coast of the Central Coast near Avoca Beach at about 30 to 40 meters deep. And another one is called the Coolidge in Vanuatu, which is at about 40, well, part of it is in about 40 meters and the other part's in about 100 meters. We went to about 45 meters on that. But, you know, you could swim through the rooms, you could see, you know, plates and cannons and all sorts of amazing things. Have I ever seen a dolphin? I've seen dolphins swimming, but not when I've been underwater. And do I have a favorite shark? Ooh, I think it's probably the grey nurse shark because they are so big and beautiful and very peaceful, and they had a really bad name for so long. So I think the fact that they're protected now and their numbers are improving, you know, it's such a good news shark story for a change. Would like to know if you ever, oh, have I seen an animal laying their eggs? So this is year 6 from Oran Park. That is a great one. I think I've seen it just after. I've definitely seen sort of one of last year diving with a whole lot of Port Jackson sharks, lots of eggs. I don't think I saw one laying an egg, but I did see them moving eggs around. That's a great question. I probably have seen sea snails and things like that laying eggs. I just might not have noticed. Last year we did see some cuttlefish mating, which was amazing, and all of the people on our dive boat. It was like a beautiful dance. But I haven't seen anyone laying eggs, unfortunately, but that would be great. Great question. Oh, excellent. Thank you very much, Amy, for that you said you enjoyed it. Oh, and Valentino, yours is a black tip reef shark, your favorite. Well, that is great. Now, guys, unfortunately, we are at the end of our session. I will be sharing some extra resources, some other videos I've taken of some of my scuba dives, and lots of extra information for you to continue your journey beneath the waves and continue learning and searching about things for Sea Week. So thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to having a chance to visit with all of you again soon. So have a great afternoon, everyone, and keep exploring the marine environment.